The year was 1119, though some chronicles place it as early as 1118, when time itself moved more slowly and the precise marking of years mattered less than the turning of seasons. Hugh de Payens, a nobleman from the Champagne region of France, had journeyed to the Holy Land with 8 companions, their hearts heavy with purpose and their souls burning with devotion. The First Crusade had ended 2 decades earlier, leaving Jerusalem in Christian hands, but the roads remained treacherous for pilgrims seeking to walk in Christ's footsteps. Bandits lurked in the rocky passes between Jaffa and Jerusalem, preying upon defenseless travelers who had spent their life savings to make this sacred journey. Hugh and his companions approached King Baldwin II of Jerusalem with a proposal both simple and revolutionary. They would dedicate their lives to protecting these pilgrims, taking vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, while serving as both monks and warriors. The king, perhaps sensing something profound in their quiet determination, granted them quarters in the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which the Crusaders believed to be built upon the ruins of Solomon's Temple. From this humble beginning, they would take their name, the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, though history would remember them simply as the Knights Templar. As you drift deeper into this tale, imagine the cool stone beneath their knees as they prayed each dawn, their voices joining in ancient Latin hymns that had echoed through monasteries across Europe for centuries. The Temple Mount, that sacred hill where Abraham had prepared to sacrifice Isaac, where Solomon had built his magnificent temple, where Christ himself had walked and taught, now sheltered these warrior monks as they began their extraordinary journey. The early years passed quietly, like a gentle stream flowing through peaceful countryside. The 9 knights lived simply, sharing horses and possessions, their days divided between prayer and patrol. They wore no distinctive garb, save for their devotion, and their numbers remained small. Yet beneath this humble exterior, something remarkable was taking shape. Hugh de Payens possessed not only martial skill, but also a keen understanding of the spiritual hunger of his age. He recognized that many nobles yearned to serve God while continuing to bear arms, to find salvation through the very skills that had defined their lives since childhood. Word of their mission began to spread throughout the Latin kingdoms of the East and back to Europe, carried by returning pilgrims who spoke of the knights' dedication and effectiveness. The roads to Jerusalem grew marginally safer, and more importantly, the concept of holy warfare took on a new dimension. These were not merely warriors blessed by priests before battle, but men who had embraced the monastic life while retaining their martial calling. They represented a synthesis that had never before existed, a bridge between the spiritual and temporal worlds that resonated deeply with the medieval mind. The religious climate of the early 12th century provided fertile ground for such an order to flourish. The Church had struggled for generations to reconcile Christian teachings of peace with the warrior culture that dominated European society. The concept of the just war, developed by St. Augustine centuries earlier, provided some theological framework, but the Templars offered something more compelling: the transformation of violence into virtue, of the sword into a tool of salvation. As the night continues around you, let this paradox settle gently in your mind, the way contradictions in dreams blend seamlessly into coherent narratives. In 1127, after nearly a decade of quiet service, Hugh de Payens embarked upon a journey that would transform his small brotherhood into a European institution. He traveled to France, leaving the dusty streets of Jerusalem for the familiar rolling hills of Champagne. His mission was twofold: to seek official recognition from the Church and to recruit new members for his order. The timing could not have been more auspicious, for Europe was experiencing a period of religious revival and reform that made the Templar mission particularly appealing. The Abbey of Clairvaux, nestled in the quiet valleys of Burgundy, served as one of his most important stops. Here he met with Bernard, the young and charismatic abbot who would later be canonized as Saint Bernard. This meeting, conducted perhaps in a simple stone cell overlooking the abbey's gardens, would prove pivotal to the Templars' future. Bernard, despite his youth, had already gained a reputation as one of the most influential religious thinkers of his generation. His endorsement would carry weight throughout Christendom. Bernard listened carefully to Hugh's description of the Templar mission, his keen theological mind recognizing both the innovation and the spiritual validity of their approach. The abbot had long grappled with the problem of Christian warfare, and the Templars seemed to offer a solution that was both practical and spiritually sound. He agreed to support their cause, a decision that would reverberate throughout the halls of ecclesiastical power. The culmination of Hugh's European journey came at the Council of Troyes in 1128, a gathering of bishops, abbots, and nobles in the court of Count Hugh of Champagne. The setting was magnificent yet solemn, with banners hanging from stone walls and the soft light of countless candles illuminating the assembled faces. Here, the Templars would receive their official recognition and their formal rule of life. The proceedings, conducted in Latin with the measured cadence of medieval ceremony, unfolded with the gravity befitting such a momentous occasion. Bernard himself had prepared much of the rule that would govern the Templars, drawing upon the Benedictine tradition while adapting it for their unique military monastic mission. The rule specified every aspect of their daily life, from the hours of prayer to the conduct of warfare, from dietary restrictions to the wearing of their distinctive white mantles. These white robes, worn by the Knight brothers, symbolized their purity and distinguished them from other military orders. Later, they would add the famous Red Cross, a symbol that would become synonymous with Templar identity. As you allow yourself to sink deeper into rest, envision these ceremonies unfolding in candlelit chambers, the voices of medieval clerics rising and falling in ancient rhythms. The formal recognition at Troyes marked not just the birth of an institution, but the crystallization of an ideal that had been forming in the collective Christian consciousness. The Templars were no longer merely 9 knights protecting pilgrims. They had become the embodiment of a new form of religious expression, one that would attract thousands of adherents and reshape the medieval world. The impact of Troyes extended far beyond mere ecclesiastical approval. The assembled nobles, many of whom had participated in the First Crusade or dreamed of doing so, saw in the Templars an opportunity to continue their contribution to the holy cause without necessarily returning to the East themselves. Donations began to flow almost immediately, transforming the poor knights from a handful of men sharing horses into an organization with significant resources. Land grants came first, scattered estates across France that would provide the foundation for the Templars' later wealth. These were not merely gifts of property, but investments in salvation itself. Medieval donors believed that supporting the Templars' mission would benefit their own souls, providing a form of spiritual insurance that was both comforting and practical. The knights who remained in Europe to manage these properties became known as the Western Templars, developing into skilled administrators and financiers who would eventually revolutionize medieval banking. The recruitment that followed Troyes exceeded even Hugh's most optimistic expectations. Younger sons of noble families, drawn by the combination of religious devotion and martial adventure, flocked to join the order. These were men trained from childhood in the arts of war, skilled with sword and lance, yet yearning for a purpose that transcended mere earthly glory. The Templars offered them exactly what they sought, a way to serve God through the very talents that had defined their upbringing. The transformation from 9 men to hundreds and eventually thousands required a complete restructuring of the Order's organization. The simple brotherhood of the early years gave way to a complex hierarchy that reflected both monastic and military traditions. At the apex stood the Grand Master, elected by the chapter general and responsible for the Order's overall direction. Below him, a series of officials managed different aspects of Templar operations. The Seneschal served as the Grand Master's deputy, the Marshal commanded the Order's military forces, and the Treasurer oversaw their growing financial resources. Regional commanders, known as preceptors or commanders, governed Templar houses throughout Europe and the East. These men, often seasoned veterans of the Order's military campaigns, combined the roles of abbot and general, managing both the spiritual and temporal affairs of their territories. Their commanderies became centres of local power, often rivaling the castles of secular lords in their influence and resources. The expansion of the Order created new challenges that tested the wisdom of their founders. The integration of new members required careful attention to maintaining the spiritual discipline that had characterized the original 9 knights. The rule provided guidance, but its application across diverse cultural and geographical contexts demanded flexibility and judgment. As the night deepens around you, let the image of these growing commanderies settle in your imagination. Stone buildings rising in the countryside, monks and warriors training together in courtyards, the sound of prayers and armor creating a unique harmony. By 1130, the Templars had established their first significant presence in the Holy Land, beyond their original quarters on the Temple Mount. The gift of the fortress of Atlit, south of Haifa, marked the beginning of their transformation into a major military power in the Crusader states. The construction and fortification of Atlit, which they renamed Château Pèlerin, demonstrated both their growing resources and their evolving military sophistication. The fortress rose from a rocky promontory overlooking the Mediterranean, its massive walls and towers reflecting the latest advances in military architecture. Unlike the simple stone keeps that had characterized earlier fortifications, Château Pèlerin incorporated innovations learned from decades of warfare in the East. Concentric walls provided multiple lines of defense, while strategically placed towers offered overlapping fields of fire for the garrison's crossbowmen and archers. The construction project required enormous resources and organizational skill. Stone had to be quarried and transported, master craftsmen recruited from across Europe, and thousands of workers fed and housed during the years-long building process. The Templars demonstrated remarkable administrative capability in managing such complex undertakings, skills that would serve them well as they expanded their operations throughout the medieval world. Château Pèlerin was more than merely a fortress. It was a statement of Templar commitment to the Holy Land and a symbol of their growing power. The castle's chapel, built with the same care and expense as its fortifications, reminded all who entered that this was not merely a military installation, but a religious house where warrior monks pursued their dual vocation of prayer and warfare. The fortress also served as a model for future Templar construction projects throughout the Crusader states. The Order would eventually control a network of castles, fortified towns, and watchtowers that stretched from the Mediterranean coast to the Jordan River. These installations protected not only pilgrims, but also the trade routes that were becoming increasingly vital to the economic life of the Latin kingdoms. The development of this military infrastructure coincided with changes in the nature of warfare in the Holy Land. The early Crusades had been characterized by large European armies arriving periodically to campaign against Muslim forces. By the 1130s, however, the conflict had evolved into a more sustained confrontation, requiring permanent garrisons and professional soldiers familiar with local conditions. The Templars, along with their rivals, the Hospitallers, filled this crucial role. Their military effectiveness derived not only from their individual skill and devotion, but also from their disciplined organization and tactical innovation. Unlike feudal armies, which often dissolved after 40 days of service, the Templars maintained constant readiness. Their ranks included not only the knight brothers who formed the heavy cavalry, but also sergeant brothers who served as infantry and support troops, along with non-noble associates who provided various specialized services. The Templar approach to warfare blended traditional European heavy cavalry tactics with adaptations learned from fighting in the Eastern Mediterranean. Their charges remained devastating against infantry formations, but they learned to coordinate more effectively with lighter cavalry and foot soldiers when facing the mobile tactics favored by their Muslim opponents. As you rest, imagine the thunder of hoofbeats across ancient battlefields, the gleam of sunlight on armor, and the disciplined formations of these warrior monks advancing under their distinctive banners. Training became a constant preoccupation within Templar houses. New recruits underwent rigorous preparation that combined military drill with religious instruction. The rules specified not only the prayers they must recite, but also the equipment they must maintain and the tactics they must master. This systematic approach to military preparation was revolutionary for its time, creating what amounted to the first professional standing army in medieval Europe. The spiritual dimension of their warfare remained paramount throughout this military evolution. Before each battle, the Templars participated in religious ceremonies that prepared their souls as carefully as their weapons prepared their bodies. The Order's chaplains, themselves often veterans of previous campaigns, provided both spiritual counsel and tactical advice. This integration of religious devotion and military professionalism created a unique esprit de corps that became legendary throughout Christendom. By the middle of the 12th century, the Templars had become one of the most powerful institutions in the Crusader states, their influence extending far beyond their original mission of protecting pilgrims. They had developed into a state within states, owning vast territories, commanding significant military forces, and wielding political influence that rivaled that of kings and princes. Their treasury, constantly replenished by donations from across Europe, allowed them to maintain their military capability even during periods when secular rulers struggled to finance their own forces. The Second Crusade, launched in 1147 in response to the fall of Edessa, provided the Templars with their first major test as an established military order. The campaign, led by King Louis VII of France and Emperor Conrad III of Germany, attracted enormous European participation and raised hopes for significant territorial gains in the East. The Templars, now numbering in the hundreds throughout their various houses, prepared to play a central role in the coming conflict. The preparations for the Second Crusade revealed both the strengths and challenges of the Templars' evolving organization. Their European houses provided financial support and new recruits, while their Eastern establishments offered tactical knowledge and logistical capabilities. The coordination required to mobilize resources across such vast distances tested their administrative systems and demonstrated the sophistication of their communications networks. Grandmaster Everard de Bars emerged as one of the Crusade's most capable leaders, his combination of military experience and diplomatic skill proving invaluable as the expedition faced mounting difficulties. Unlike many secular commanders who thought primarily in terms of immediate tactical advantage, Everard understood the long-term strategic implications of each decision. His counsel often provided a stabilizing influence during the crisis-filled journey through Anatolia. The march across Asia Minor proved disastrous for much of the crusading army, but the Templars' discipline and experience allowed them to maintain better order than most contingents. Their rearguard actions during the retreat from the disastrous battle near Dorylaeum saved thousands of lives and demonstrated their value as professional soldiers. As the night continues to enfold you, let the image of their disciplined ranks holding firm against overwhelming odds speak to the power of dedication and training over mere enthusiasm. Despite their individual effectiveness, the Second Crusade ended in failure with the unsuccessful siege of Damascus in 1148. The political complexities of the siege, involving conflicting interests among the Crusader states and their European reinforcements, illustrated the challenges facing any attempt at unified action in the East. The Templars, while participating in the siege, also gained valuable lessons about the limitations of military force when not accompanied by diplomatic wisdom and political unity. The aftermath of the Second Crusade's failure prompted significant reflection within the Templar order about their role and methods. They had proven themselves as warriors and had gained enormous prestige throughout Europe, but the ultimate goal of expanding Christian control in the Holy Land remained elusive. This period of introspection led to refinements in their approach that would characterize their operations for the remainder of the 12th century. Strategic thinking began to emphasize the importance of permanent fortifications and sustained presence over the dramatic but temporary impact of large crusading armies. The Templars invested heavily in strengthening their existing castles and acquiring new strongholds, creating an interconnected network of fortifications that could support each other during sieges and provide secure bases for offensive operations. Their castle at Tortosa, acquired in 1152, exemplified this new strategic approach. Located on the Syrian coast north of Tripoli, Tortosa controlled important land and sea routes while providing a secure harbour for Templar ships. The fortress combined the lessons learned at Château Pellerin with innovations appropriate to its coastal location, creating one of the most sophisticated defensive installations in the Crusader states. The economic dimensions of Templar power also expanded significantly during the mid-12th century. Their European properties generated substantial revenue through agricultural production, but increasingly, they also derived income from more innovative sources. The security they could provide for travelers and merchants made them natural bankers, and they began developing the financial services that would later make them the premier banking institution of medieval Europe. The famous Templar credit system emerged from practical necessity rather than deliberate innovation. A merchant traveling from Paris to Jerusalem could deposit funds at a Templar house in France and receive documentation allowing him to withdraw equivalent amounts in the East, avoiding the dangers of carrying large sums through bandit-infested territories. This service proved so valuable that demand quickly expanded beyond pilgrims and crusaders, to include secular merchants engaged in the lucrative Eastern trade. The development of Templar banking required unprecedented levels of record-keeping and communication. Letters had to be exchanged regularly between houses separated by thousands of miles, accounts reconciled across different currencies and legal systems. and trust maintained through systems of verification that prevented fraud. The Order's religious discipline and international organization made them uniquely suited to provide such services, and their reputation for integrity became as valuable as their military prowess. By 1160, Templar houses throughout Europe were functioning as sophisticated financial institutions, their treasuries serving as repositories for the wealth of nobles, merchants, and even kings. The French royal treasury was frequently housed in the Templar preceptory in Paris, and English kings regularly borrowed from Templar resources to finance their military campaigns. This financial power gave the Order political influence that extended far beyond their military capabilities. The wealth generated by their financial operations allowed the Templars to maintain their military establishment even during periods when donations declined or military expenses increased. Unlike secular rulers who often struggled to pay their troops, the Templars could ensure regular wages and proper equipment for their forces. This financial stability contributed significantly to their military effectiveness and helped maintain the discipline that distinguished them from other medieval armies. As you allow sleep to approach more closely, consider the quiet counting houses where Templar clerks worked by candlelight, recording transactions that connected the marketplaces of London with the bazaars of Damascus. Their ledgers, maintained with the same precision as their prayer books, represented a revolution in medieval commerce that would have consequences extending far beyond the Crusader states. The third quarter of the 12th century witnessed the emergence of the Templars' greatest military challenge and their most celebrated leader. The rise of Saladin, the Kurdish general who would unite much of the Muslim Middle East under his authority, coincided with increasing political fragmentation among the Crusader states. As Saladin consolidated his power in Egypt and Syria, the Latin kingdoms found themselves facing their most formidable opponent since the time of the First Crusade. Gerard de Riedfort, who became Grand Master in 1885, embodied both the strengths and weaknesses of the Templars at this crucial moment in their history. A skilled warrior with extensive experience in Eastern warfare, Gerard possessed the tactical knowledge and personal courage that had made the Order legendary. However, his aggressive temperament and political inflexibility would contribute to decisions that ultimately proved catastrophic for the Crusader cause. The political situation in the Kingdom of Jerusalem during the 1880s was extraordinarily complex, with succession disputes and factional conflicts weakening the Christian response to Saladin's growing threat. The young king Baldwin IV, afflicted with leprosy, struggled to maintain unity among his fractious nobles while simultaneously conducting military campaigns against increasingly confident Muslim forces. The Templars, as one of the most powerful military institutions in the kingdom, found themselves inevitably drawn into these political controversies. Gerard de Riedfort aligned the Order with the court faction supporting Guy de Lusignan's claim to the throne, a decision that placed the Templars in direct opposition to other powerful nobles and military orders. This political involvement, while perhaps inevitable given their resources and influence, marked a departure from the more cautious approach of earlier grandmasters who had sought to remain above factional disputes. The consequences of this political engagement became apparent during the crisis of 1187, when Saladin launched his most ambitious campaign against the Crusader states. The Muslim leader had spent years preparing for this offensive, assembling a large and well-equipped army, while exploiting the political divisions among his Christian opponents. His strategy combined military pressure with diplomatic initiatives designed to further fragment Crusader unity. The campaign began with Saladin's invasion of Galilee and his siege of Tiberias. a fortress controlled by Raymond of Tripoli, one of the most experienced military commanders in the Latin East. The siege created a strategic dilemma for the Christian forces, whether to march across the waterless hills of Galilee to relieve Tiberias or to remain in a strong defensive position and allow the fortress to fall. The decision would ultimately determine the fate of the Crusader states. King Guy, under pressure from Gerard de Riedefort and other aggressive advisors, chose to march toward Tiberias, despite the tactical disadvantages of crossing the Galilean hills during the height of summer. The Christian army, numbering perhaps 20,000 men, began its advance on July 3rd, 1187, under a blazing sun that promised to test their endurance as severely as any enemy action. The march quickly became a nightmare of heat, thirst, and harassment by Saladin's mobile forces. The Templars, fighting in the rear guard, bore much of the burden of protecting the army from constant Muslim attacks. Their discipline and training allowed them to maintain formation even under extreme stress, but the overall situation deteriorated with each passing hour as water supplies dwindled and men began to collapse from heat exhaustion. By evening, the Christian army had reached the hills overlooking the Sea of Galilee, within sight of water but unable to reach it due to Muslim forces blocking their path. The decision to camp overnight on the waterless plateau of Hattin sealed their fate, as Saladin's forces surrounded them during the darkness, cutting off any possibility of retreat or relief. The Battle of Hattin, fought on July 4th, 1187, marked one of the most decisive defeats in Crusader history and effectively ended the first period of Templar power in the East. The Christian army, weakened by thirst and demoralized by their desperate situation, could not match the coordinated attacks of Saladin's forces. The Templars fought with their customary courage, launching several charges that temporarily disrupted Muslim formations, but the outcome was never seriously in doubt. Gerard de Riedefort was among those captured when the Christian army finally collapsed, though he would later be ransomed and released. Most of the Templar knights taken prisoner were executed on Saladin's orders, their reputation for military effectiveness making them too dangerous to ransom or release. This destruction of experienced personnel represented a catastrophic blow to the order's military capability, one that would take years to remedy. The fall of Jerusalem itself followed within months, as Saladin's victorious army swept through the defenseless Crusader territories. The ancient city, goal of countless pilgrims and symbol of Christian presence in the East, surrendered on October 2nd, 1187, after a brief siege. The Templars lost not only their symbolic headquarters on the Temple Mount, but also much of the infrastructure they had spent decades developing throughout the kingdom. As you drift toward deeper rest, let the weight of this great defeat settle gently in your imagination. The Battle of Hattin was more than a military disaster. It represented the end of an era of Templar expansion and confidence. Yet from this catastrophe would emerge new opportunities and challenges that would test the Order's resilience and adaptability in ways their founders could never have anticipated. The aftermath of Hattin reverberated through Europe like thunder across a summer sky, the news of Jerusalem's fall striking the Christian world with a force that demanded immediate response. In the great halls of kings and the quiet cells of monasteries, men and women alike struggled to comprehend how the Holy City, won at such tremendous cost during the First Crusade, could have fallen once again to Muslim forces. The Third Crusade, which emerged from this collective shock and determination, would provide the Templars with an opportunity to demonstrate their resilience and adaptability in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges. The response from Europe surpassed even the enthusiasm that had greeted the First Crusade nearly a century earlier. 3 of medieval Europe's most powerful rulers took the cross. Frederick Barbarossa, the Holy Roman Emperor, whose very name inspired both fear and respect throughout Christendom. Philip Augustus of France, young but already proving himself one of the most capable monarchs of his generation. And Richard the Lionheart of England, whose reputation for martial prowess had already become legendary. The participation of these great lords promised resources and leadership that could potentially reverse the disasters of 1187. The Templars, meanwhile, had begun the painful process of rebuilding their shattered organization in the East. The new Grand Master, Robert de Sablé, brought both military experience and diplomatic skill to his challenging position. Unlike his predecessor, Robert understood that the Order's survival depended not only on military prowess, but also on political wisdom and strategic flexibility. The catastrophe at Hattin had taught harsh lessons about the dangers of factional involvement and tactical overconfidence. The Order's European houses provided crucial support during this period of reconstruction, their financial resources and recruitment capabilities enabling a surprisingly rapid recovery. New knights arrived regularly from France, England, and the German states, many of them younger sons of noble families inspired by the disaster to dedicate themselves to the holy cause. These reinforcements brought not only swords and lances, but also the latest developments in military technology and tactics learned from European warfare. The arrival of the crusading armies in the East beginning in 1189 created new opportunities and challenges for the reconstituted Templar forces. The siege of Acre, which would consume nearly 2 years and cost thousands of lives, became the focal point of Christian efforts to regain a foothold in the Holy Land. The Templars played a crucial role in maintaining the siege lines, their engineering expertise and financial resources proving as valuable as their fighting ability. The siege itself embodied all the complexities of medieval warfare, combining elements of military engineering, diplomacy, and endurance that tested every participant to their limits. The city of Acre, strongly fortified and resupplied by sea, could not be taken by direct assault. Instead, the Christian forces had to construct elaborate siege works while simultaneously defending themselves against Saladin's relief efforts. This dual challenge required resources and coordination on an unprecedented scale. Templar engineers trained in the construction and maintenance of their own fortifications contributed significantly to the siege efforts. They supervised the building of siege towers, the digging of mines beneath the city walls, and the construction of mangonels and other siege engines that could batter Acre's defences. Their expertise, gained through decades of castle building throughout the Crusader states, proved invaluable in the technical aspects of siege warfare. The financial demands of maintaining such a large army for such an extended period strained even the considerable resources of the participating monarchs. The Templars, with their international banking network and accumulated treasures, provided crucial financial support that helped prevent the siege from collapsing due to lack of funds. Their ability to advance money against future donations or territorial grants kept supplies flowing and wages paid during the most difficult periods. The personal relationships that developed between Templar leaders and the crusading monarchs during the siege would have lasting consequences for the Order's future. Richard the Lionheart, in particular, developed considerable respect for Templar military capabilities and organizational efficiency. This relationship would lead to significant territorial grants and privileges that partially compensated for the losses suffered during Saladin's conquests. As you allow the gentle rhythm of this narrative to carry you towards sleep, imagine the campfires burning before the walls of Acre. the sound of prayers and weapons maintenance blending in the evening air. The siege represented a crucial test of Christian determination and capability, and the Templars' contribution to its eventual success in 1191 restored much of their prestige and confidence. The fall of Acre marked the beginning of a new phase in the Third Crusade, as the Christian forces could finally advance southward toward their ultimate goal of recapturing Jerusalem. However, the strategic situation remained extremely challenging, with Saladin's field army intact and the coastal cities between Acre and Jerusalem still under Muslim control. The advance would require careful coordination between the various crusading contingents and the permanent residents of the Crusader states. The march from Acre to Jaffa in the summer of 1191 showcased the tactical innovations that the Templars had developed in response to their earlier defeats. Instead of the traditional deep columns that had proved so vulnerable to Muslim harassment, the Christian army adopted a more flexible formation that could respond quickly to attacks from any direction. The Templars, fighting in the vanguard, demonstrated the disciplined mobility that would characterize their operations for the remainder of the Crusade. The Battle of Arsuf, fought on September 7, 1191, provided the Templars with an opportunity to demonstrate their tactical evolution since Hattin. When Saladin's forces launched a coordinated assault on the Christian column, the Templars maintained their formation despite heavy pressure, waiting for Richard's signal before launching their countercharge. This discipline under extreme stress impressed even their political rivals and re-established their reputation as elite heavy cavalry. The victory at Arsuf opened the road to Jaffa and provided the crusading army with a secure base for potential operations against Jerusalem itself. However, the strategic challenges of recapturing the Holy City proved even more daunting than the tactical problems of defeating Saladin's field forces. Jerusalem's location, far from the coast and surrounded by territory under Muslim control, made any siege extremely difficult to maintain. The Templars, drawing on their strategic experience in the region, counseled caution regarding direct operations against Jerusalem. They understood better than the newly arrived Crusaders the logistical challenges of maintaining a large army in the Judean hills, especially during winter months when supply difficulties would multiply. Their advice reflected hard-learned lessons about the limitations of European military methods in Eastern conditions. The debates over strategy that consumed the winter of 1191 to 1192 revealed fundamental differences in perspective between the permanent residents of the Crusader states and the temporary Crusaders from Europe. The Templars, along with other established Eastern institutions, thought in terms of long-term strategic advantage and sustainable military positions. The European Crusaders, motivated by religious enthusiasm and time constraints, preferred bold strokes that might achieve dramatic results, regardless of their long-term consequences. These strategic disagreements ultimately prevented any serious attempt to recapture Jerusalem during the Third Crusade, though the Christian forces did advance close enough to see the city's walls during their reconnaissance operations. The Templars' influence in counseling restraint reflected their evolved understanding of Eastern warfare and their responsibility for maintaining Christian positions long after the crusading armies returned to Europe. The truce negotiated between Richard and Saladin in September 1192 established a new equilibrium in the Holy Land that would persist for several decades. The Christians retained control of a narrow coastal strip stretching from Antioch to Jaffa, while the Muslims kept Jerusalem and most of the interior. This arrangement, while disappointing to those who had hoped for more complete success, provided a stable foundation for the rebuilding of Templar power in the East. The territorial arrangements established by the truce gave the Templars several new strongholds to replace those lost during Saladin's conquests. The castle of Saft, located in the Galilee Hills, north of the Sea of Galilee, became one of their most important positions during this period. The fortress commanded strategic mountain passes and provided a base for operations in the Jordan Valley, demonstrating the Order's continued commitment to forward defense despite their reduced circumstances. The reconstruction of Saft illustrated the Templars' adaptation to new military realities in the post-Hattin period. The castle incorporated lessons learned from their defeats, with improved designs that provided better fields of fire and more secure water supplies. The fortification's concentric walls and sophisticated gate system reflected the latest developments in military architecture, making it virtually impregnable to direct assault. The garrison established at Saft also demonstrated the Templars' evolving approach to recruitment and training. The castle housed not only knight brothers and sergeant brothers, but also specialists in siege warfare, intelligence gathering, and local administration. This diversification of personnel reflected the Order's recognition that military effectiveness in the East required more than traditional heavy cavalry charges. The economic recovery of the Templar Order during the 1190s paralleled their military reconstruction, as their European houses continued to generate substantial revenues despite the enormous expenses of the Third Crusade. The Order's financial network, tested but not broken by the disasters of the 1180s, proved remarkably resilient and adaptable to changing conditions. New sources of revenue emerged as European commerce expanded and new trading opportunities developed. The Templars' role in financing the Third Crusade had established valuable relationships with merchant communities throughout Europe, leading to expanded banking services and commercial partnerships. Italian merchants in particular began using Templar facilities for their Eastern trade, appreciating both the security and the efficiency of the Order's financial operations. These commercial relationships provided steady income that supplemented traditional donations and agricultural revenues. As the 12th century drew to a close, the Templars had successfully navigated their greatest crisis and emerged as a more sophisticated and adaptable organization. The catastrophe at Hattin had forced them to reconsider fundamental assumptions about their role and methods, leading to innovations that would serve them well in the challenges ahead. As you settle deeper into peaceful rest, let the image of their rebuilt castles standing firm against the eastern sky represent the resilience of human determination in the face of overwhelming adversity. The turn of the 13th century brought new challenges and opportunities that would test the Templars' hard-won wisdom and adaptability. The Fourth Crusade, launched in 1202 with high hopes for the recapture of Jerusalem, instead diverted to Constantinople, resulting in the sack of the Byzantine capital and the establishment of Latin rule in former Greek territories. This unexpected development created new responsibilities and opportunities for the military orders, while simultaneously demonstrating the unpredictable nature of medieval international relations. The Templars' response to the Fourth Crusade's diversion revealed their growing political sophistication and strategic thinking. Unlike some other institutions that became deeply involved in the Byzantine adventure, the Templars maintained their focus on the Holy Land, understanding that their primary mission remained the defense of Christian positions in Syria and Palestine. This strategic clarity, learned through bitter experience, helped them avoid entanglement in conflicts that might have diverted resources from their core responsibilities. The early years of the 13th century witnessed significant developments in the Order's internal organization and international expansion. New Templar houses were established throughout Europe, from the kingdoms of Iberia to the emerging Polish state, reflecting both the Order's continued appeal and the expansion of medieval Christendom itself. Each new establishment required careful integration into the existing administrative structure while adapting to local conditions and customs. The Iberian Peninsula provided particularly fertile ground for Templar expansion, as the ongoing Reconquista offered opportunities for military service that complemented their activities in the Holy Land. Spanish and Portuguese nobles, engaged in their own holy war against Muslim forces, appreciated the Templars' military expertise and organizational capabilities. The Order received significant territorial grants in return for their participation in campaigns against the Almohads and other Muslim dynasties that still controlled much of southern Iberia. Templar castles in Spain, such as Ponferrada in Leon and Miravet in Catalonia, served dual purposes as military strongholds and administrative centers. These fortifications controlled strategic river crossings and mountain passes, while housing the personnel necessary to manage the Order's growing Iberian properties. The architectural style of these Spanish castles reflected local building traditions, while incorporating defensive innovations developed through the Order's Eastern experience. The integration of Iberian properties into the Templars' international network required sophisticated communication and coordination systems. Messages and personnel moved regularly between Spanish commanderies and houses in France, England, and the Holy Land, creating an information network that rivaled those of contemporary monarchs. This communications capability provided strategic advantages that extended far beyond mere administrative efficiency. In England, the Templars established their principal house at Temple Church in London, a magnificent round church that became one of the architectural wonders of medieval England. The church's circular design, inspired by the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, reminded visitors of the Order's ultimate spiritual purpose, while demonstrating their wealth and artistic sophistication. The surrounding complex housed the Order's English treasury and administrative offices, making it a center of financial and political influence. English Templar properties generated substantial revenues through both agricultural production and financial services. The Order's reputation for integrity and security made them natural bankers for English nobles and merchants, while their international connections facilitated trade with continental Europe and the Mediterranean world. King John of England frequently borrowed from Templar resources, establishing a relationship that would have significant consequences during the political crises of his reign. The Templars' financial operations in England, as elsewhere in Europe, contributed to fundamental changes in medieval economic life. Their credit systems reduced the risks associated with long-distance trade, while their standardized weights and measures facilitated commercial transactions across political boundaries. These innovations, born from practical necessity, helped create the economic infrastructure that would support Europe's later commercial revolution. French Templar houses remained the heart of the Order's European organization, with the Paris Temple serving as the effective capital of their Western operations. The Parisian commandery, located in the Marais district, grew into a complex of buildings that included churches, residential quarters, workshops, and treasury facilities. The preceptor of Paris wielded influence that extended throughout the French kingdom and often into international affairs. The relationship between the Templars and the French monarchy evolved significantly during the early 13th century, as both institutions adapted to changing political and economic conditions. Kings Philip Augustus and later Louis VIII utilized Templar financial services extensively, while the order benefited from royal protection and privileges. This mutually beneficial relationship would continue for several generations, though it also created dependencies that would eventually prove dangerous. The Fifth Crusade, launched in 1217, provided the Templars with their next major test as reconstructed military organization. Unlike the Fourth Crusade's diversion to Constantinople, this new expedition maintained its focus on the Holy Land, though it ultimately targeted Egypt rather than Palestine itself. The strategic logic of attacking the source of Muslim power in Egypt, rather than attempting direct operations against Jerusalem, reflected the kind of sophisticated thinking that had emerged from earlier failures. Grandmaster Guillaume de Chartres led the Templar contingent that participated in the Egyptian campaign, bringing both military expertise and financial resources that proved crucial to the expedition's initial success. The Siege of Damietta, which began in 1218, required the same kind of sustained effort and technical expertise that had characterized the Siege of Acre during the Third Crusade. The Templars' engineering capabilities and organizational discipline once again proved invaluable in the complex logistics of siege warfare. The capture of Damietta in November 1219 represented a significant victory for the crusading forces and demonstrated the continued effectiveness of coordinated Christian military action in the East. The Templars played a crucial role not only in the military operations, but also in the negotiations that followed, their diplomatic experience helping to navigate the complex political situations that arose from victory. However, the subsequent advance into the Nile Delta during the flood season of 1221 ended in disaster when the crusading army became trapped by rising waters and Egyptian counterattacks. The Templars, fighting in the rear guard during the retreat, once again demonstrated their discipline under extreme adversity, but could not prevent the overall failure of the campaign. The loss of Damietta and the destruction of much of the crusading army marked another setback in Christian attempts to recapture Jerusalem. The failure of the Fifth Crusade prompted further reflection within the Templar order about strategic priorities and tactical methods. The recurring pattern of initial success followed by ultimate failure suggested fundamental problems with crusading strategy that went beyond mere military technique. The Templars, with their permanent presence in the East and long-term perspective, began to advocate for different approaches that emphasized sustainable positions rather than dramatic gestures. The diplomatic revolution, initiated by Emperor Frederick II in the 1220s, offered an alternative model that appealed to Templar strategic thinking. Frederick's negotiations with Sultan al-Kamil of Egypt, conducted while the emperor was technically under papal excommunication, resulted in the peaceful restoration of Jerusalem to Christian control in 1229. This achievement through diplomacy, rather than warfare, demonstrated possibilities that pure military approaches had failed to realize. The Templars' response to Frederick's success revealed the complexities of their position within the broader framework of medieval Christendom. While they welcomed the restoration of Christian control over Jerusalem, they remained suspicious of Frederick's methods and motivations. The emperor's conflicts with the papacy created political difficulties for an order that depended on papal support, while his autocratic tendencies threatened the autonomy that the military orders had enjoyed in the East. The brief restoration of Christian Jerusalem allowed the Templars to re-establish a presence in the Holy City, though their new quarters could not match the symbolic importance of their former position on the Temple Mount. The limitations imposed by the treaty with Al-Kamil prevented significant fortification of the city, leaving it vulnerable to future Muslim attacks. The Templars understood these limitations and prepared accordingly, maintaining their primary defensive positions in the coastal cities and fortified inland strongholds. The 1230s and 1240s represented a period of relative stability in the Holy Land, as the various Muslim rulers were more concerned with their own internal conflicts than with eliminating the Christian presence. This respite allowed the Templars to strengthen their positions and adapt to the new strategic realities created by Frederick's treaty. However, the underlying weakness of the Christian position remained apparent to thoughtful observers who understood the temporary nature of Muslim disunity. As you allow the gentle progression of this historical narrative to guide you toward deeper rest, consider the remarkable adaptability demonstrated by the Templars throughout these decades of challenge and change. Their ability to evolve their strategies and methods while maintaining their essential character speaks to the strength of their institutional foundations and the wisdom of their leadership during these crucial years. The emergence of new Muslim leadership in the persons of the Ayyubid sultans who succeeded Saladin created fresh challenges for the Templars and other Christian institutions in the East. These rulers, while often engaged in conflicts with each other, shared a commitment to eventual elimination of the Crusader states that made any long-term accommodation unlikely. The Templars' intelligence networks, developed through decades of Eastern experience, provided valuable information about these political developments and their implications for Christian security. The Mongol invasions that began in the 1240s created unprecedented disruption throughout the Middle East, offering both opportunities and dangers for the Templars and their allies. The Mongol destruction of Baghdad in 1258 eliminated the Abbasid Caliphate and fundamentally altered the political landscape of the region. Some Christian leaders hoped that the Mongols might prove to be allies against Muslim power, while others feared that the nomadic conquerors represented an even greater threat than their Islamic opponents. Templar responses to the Mongol phenomenon demonstrated their sophisticated understanding of international relations and their ability to adapt to rapidly changing circumstances. Rather than committing themselves completely to either alliance with or opposition to the Mongols, they maintained flexible positions that allowed them to protect their interests regardless of how the broader conflict developed. This strategic pragmatism, learned through bitter experience, served them better than the more rigid approaches adopted by some of their contemporaries. The rise of the Mamluks in Egypt during the 1250s created the most serious threat that the Templars had faced since the time of Saladin. These former slave soldiers, trained from childhood in military arts and united by common experience and mutual loyalty, possessed both the military capability and political unity that had been lacking among previous Muslim opponents. Sultan Baybars, who emerged as the dominant Mamluk leader in the 1260s, combined tactical brilliance with strategic vision in ways that posed unprecedented challenges for Christian defense. Baybars' systematic campaign against the Crusader states began with the capture of Antioch in 1268, demonstrating both his military capabilities and his determination to eliminate the Christian presence entirely. Unlike previous Muslim leaders, who had often been content with tribute payments or limited territorial concessions, Baybars sought complete conquest and the permanent elimination of Latin rule in the East. This inflexibility made diplomatic solutions increasingly unlikely and forced the Templars to prepare for a fight to the finish. The defense of their remaining strongholds became the Templars' primary focus during the final decades of the 13th century. Castles such as Safed, Beaufort, and their coastal positions required constant reinforcement and resupply as Mamluk pressure intensified. The Order's financial resources, accumulated over nearly 2 centuries of operation, were directed increasingly toward these defensive efforts rather than expansion or offensive operations. The psychological impact of the Mamluk advance created additional challenges for Templar leadership, as morale problems developed among both the military personnel and the civilian populations under their protection. The seemingly inevitable nature of Christian defeat required careful management to prevent panic and desertion that could precipitate complete collapse. Templar discipline and religious devotion provided crucial stability during these difficult years. The fall of individual strongholds to Mamluk forces created a cascade effect that accelerated the overall Christian collapse. Each lost position reduced the defensive depth available to the remaining garrisons while providing Baibars with additional resources and strategic advantages. The Templars found themselves fighting an increasingly hopeless campaign of delay and attrition, rather than pursuing any realistic hope of ultimate victory. The siege and fall of Acre in 1291 marked the effective end of the Crusader states and the conclusion of the Templars' role as defenders of Christian territories in the Holy Land. The final assault, launched by Sultan al-Ashraf Khalil, Baibars' successor, overwhelmed the city's defences despite desperate resistance from the remaining Templar and Hospitaller forces. Grandmaster Guillaume de Beaujeu died fighting in the breach, his death symbolising the end of an era in Templar history. The evacuation of surviving Templars from Acre and other remaining coastal positions marked one of the most traumatic moments in the Order's history. The loss of their eastern territories eliminated not only their original mission, but also their primary source of purpose and identity. The survivors who reached Cyprus and other refuge areas faced the enormous challenge of reimagining their role in a world where their traditional function no longer existed. As the night deepens around you, let the image of those final evacuations serve as a reminder of how even the mightiest institutions must eventually confront fundamental changes in the world around them. The Templars' loss of the Holy Land was not merely a military defeat, but a spiritual and institutional crisis that would test their survival in ways their founders could never have anticipated. The morning after the fall of Acre found scattered Templar survivors on the beaches of Cyprus, their white mantles stained with salt and blood, their eyes haunted by the sight of flames consuming the city they had died trying to defend. These remnants of a once mighty order faced a crisis that transcended mere military defeat. They confronted the fundamental question of their continued existence in a world where their original purpose had been violently erased. As you drift into the final portion of this ancient tale, let the gentle rhythm of waves against Cypriot shores carry you toward the peaceful conclusion of sleep. Grandmaster Thibaut Gaudin, elected hastily after Guillaume de Beaujeu's death in the final assault on Acre, attempted to maintain some semblance of organizational continuity amid the chaos of defeat and displacement. The remnants of the Order's eastern personnel, supplemented by whatever resources could be salvaged from their abandoned strongholds, established temporary headquarters in Limassol. The castle there, granted to them by the Cypriot king, provided both physical security and a symbolic connection to their military traditions. Yet the challenges facing the reconstituted order on Cyprus extended far beyond mere logistics and accommodation. The Templars had lost not only their territories and much of their personnel, but also their fundamental reason for existence. For nearly 2 centuries, their identity had been inextricably linked to the defense of Christian pilgrims and territories in the Holy Land. With that mission eliminated, they faced the unprecedented task of reinventing themselves or accepting gradual obsolescence. The response from Europe to news of Acre's fall reflected the complex and often contradictory attitudes that had developed toward the Templars over the preceding decades. While many nobles and clergy expressed sympathy for their losses and admiration for their final stand, others questioned whether the military orders had justified the enormous resources invested in them over the years. The failure to maintain Christian control in the East inevitably prompted reconsideration of the entire crusading enterprise and the institutions associated with it. Pope Nicholas IV, despite his genuine grief over the loss of the Holy Land, found himself under pressure to address growing criticism of the military orders and their apparent inability to fulfill their stated mission. Various reform proposals circulated throughout European ecclesiastical circles, ranging from modest administrative changes to complete merger of the Templars and Hospitallers under unified leadership. These discussions, while often well-intentioned, created an atmosphere of uncertainty that complicated the Order's efforts to rebuild and adapt. The Templars' vast European holdings provided both resources and complications as they attempted to navigate this period of institutional crisis. Their network of commanderies, agricultural estates, and financial operations continued to generate substantial revenues, but the purpose for which these resources had been accumulated no longer existed. The question of how to redirect their wealth and capabilities created internal debates that reflected deeper uncertainties about their future role. Some Templar leaders advocated for immediate preparation of a new crusade to recapture the Holy Land, arguing that their temporary displacement from the East merely represented a setback similar to those they had overcome before. These voices, often representing the more traditionally minded elements within the Order, insisted that maintaining their military capabilities and crusading identity remained essential regardless of current circumstances. Other leaders, particularly those with extensive experience in European operations, suggested that the Order should focus on consolidating and developing their Western properties, while gradually transitioning toward different forms of religious and charitable service. This approach recognized the changing political and religious climate in Europe, where enthusiasm for distant crusades was giving way to more localized concerns and different expressions of Christian devotion. The debate over future direction intensified during the mastership of Jacques de Molay, elected in 1292 after Thibaut Gaudin's death. Jacques, a veteran of Eastern campaigns and deeply committed to traditional Templar values, embodied the faction that refused to accept the permanent loss of the Holy Land. His leadership would prove both inspiring and ultimately tragic, as his unwillingness to adapt to changing circumstances contributed to the Order's eventual destruction. Jacques de Molay's vision for the Templars' future rested on two fundamental assumptions: that European enthusiasm for crusading could be revived through proper leadership and persuasion, and that the military orders possessed unique capabilities that made them indispensable for any future Eastern operations. Both assumptions would prove incorrect, but they shaped Templar policy during the crucial final decades of their existence. The Grand Master's diplomatic efforts to generate support for a new crusade brought him into frequent contact with European monarchs and papal officials, allowing him to observe firsthand the changing political landscape of the early 14th century. The emergence of stronger centralized monarchies, particularly in France and England, had altered the balance of power in ways that reduced the autonomy previously enjoyed by international institutions like the military orders. King Philip IV of France, known as Philip the Fair, represented the new model of medieval kingship that viewed independent institutions within royal territories as potential threats to be controlled or eliminated. His conflicts with Pope Boniface VIII over the extent of royal versus papal authority had demonstrated his willingness to challenge even the most sacred medieval institutions when he perceived them as obstacles to his ambitions. The Templars' wealth and independence made them particularly vulnerable to royal pressure, especially given their reduced prestige following the loss of the Holy Land. Philip's financial difficulties, caused by expensive wars with England and Flanders, created additional incentives for him to view the Order's resources as potential solutions to his fiscal problems. The combination of financial need and political calculation would prove deadly for the Templars. The accusations that Philip would eventually level against the Templars reflected broader anxieties about heresy and corruption that characterized the religious climate of the early 14th century. The papal suppression of various heretical movements had created an atmosphere of suspicion in which unorthodox practices or beliefs could easily be magnified into charges of serious religious crime. The Templars' secrecy about their internal ceremonies, while originally designed to protect legitimate institutional practices, provided ammunition for those seeking to portray them as dangerous heretics. As you allow sleep to draw ever closer, let the image of Jacques de Molay in his final years of freedom remind you of how individual character and institutional destiny can become tragically intertwined. His devotion to ideals that no longer match contemporary realities would soon transform him from a respected religious leader into one of history's most famous martyrs. The conspiracy that Philip IV constructed against the Templars required months of careful preparation and demonstrated the sophisticated administrative capabilities of the early 14th century French monarchy. Royal agents infiltrated Templar houses, gathering information about personnel, resources, and practices that could be used to support future accusations. The king's legal advisors developed the juridical framework that would justify unprecedented action against an institution that had previously enjoyed papal protection. The involvement of Guillaume de Nogaret, Philip's chief minister and veteran of the conflict with Boniface VIII, brought exceptional tactical skill to the anti-Templar campaign. Nogaret understood both the legal technicalities required to justify royal action and the propaganda techniques necessary to generate public support for what amounted to the destruction of a venerable religious institution. His experience in defeating papal resistance during the Boniface affair provided valuable precedents for overcoming ecclesiastical opposition. The coordination required to arrest Templars simultaneously throughout France on October 13, 1307, represented one of the most impressive administrative achievements of medieval government. Royal officials, operating under sealed orders that were opened at dawn on the appointed day, succeeded in capturing most of the order's French personnel before they could escape or organize resistance. This tactical success provided Philip with the leverage he needed to pursue his broader objectives. The charges leveled against the arrested Templars combined elements of genuine religious concern with calculated political accusations designed to make papal defense impossible. Allegations of heretical practices, including denial of Christ and worship of mysterious idols, played upon popular fears about secret ceremonies and hidden beliefs. Additional charges of financial corruption and moral degeneracy provided secular justifications for royal intervention in what was technically an ecclesiastical matter. The interrogations that followed the mass arrests employed techniques that were both legally sophisticated and physically brutal, reflecting the dual nature of early 14th century judicial processes. Royal inquisitors, trained in both canon law and civil procedure, knew exactly which admissions they needed to obtain to support their predetermined conclusions. The use of torture, while legally regulated, provided the means to extract confessions that would justify subsequent actions. The confessions obtained under torture created a complex web of accusations and admissions that made objective evaluation of the charges extremely difficult. Some Templars, under extreme duress, admitted to practices that may have represented misunderstood ceremonies or desperate attempts to end their suffering. Others maintained their innocence despite prolonged interrogation, creating contradictory testimony that complicated efforts to determine the truth. Pope Clement V, faced with Philip's fait accompli and his own political weakness following the French victory over Boniface VIII, found himself unable to provide effective protection for the Templars. His attempts to assert papal jurisdiction over the proceedings were consistently outmaneuvered by Philip's legal and political strategies. The Pope's eventual decision to suppress the order, while stopping short of condemning them as heretics, represented a compromise that satisfied no one and saved very few Templar lives. The suppression process, formalized through the bull vox in excelso in 1312, extended beyond France to include Templar houses throughout Europe. However, the response in other kingdoms varied significantly based on local political conditions and the relationships between secular and ecclesiastical authorities. Some rulers, particularly those who had borrowed extensively from the Templars, welcomed the opportunity to cancel their debts and confiscate order properties. Others, recognizing the precedent being set, offered more resistance to papal and French pressure. In England, King Edward II initially resisted demands for Templar persecution, possibly due to his government's extensive financial relationships with the order. However, diplomatic pressure from France and the papacy eventually forced English compliance with the suppression order. The English Templars, while arrested and interrogated, generally faced less severe treatment than their French counterparts, with many eventually being absorbed into other religious orders. The Iberian kingdoms, engaged in their own ongoing Reconquista campaigns, proved more receptive to arguments about the Templars' continued military value. Portugal and Aragon found ways to preserve much of the order's structure and personnel under new names and modified arrangements. The Order of Christ in Portugal and the Order of Montesa in Aragon maintained many Templar traditions while adapting to changed circumstances in ways that the original order had been unable to achieve. The German Empire's fragmented political structure prevented the kind of coordinated suppression that had been possible in France, allowing many German Templars to escape persecution or transfer to other military orders. The Teutonic Knights, operating primarily in Eastern Europe, provided an alternative outlet for those Templars who wished to continue their military religious vocation in different circumstances. The fate of Templar properties throughout Europe created opportunities for royal and noble enrichment that may have provided as much motivation for the suppression as any genuine religious concerns. The order's extensive holdings, accumulated over 2 centuries of donations and careful management, represented enormous wealth that was redistributed according to the political interests of local rulers, rather than any consistent principle of justice or canon law. The final act of the Templar drama played out on a small island in the Seine River in Paris on March 18, 1314, when Jacques de Molay and Geoffrey de Charnay, the order's preceptor of Normandy, were burned at the stake after retracting their earlier confessions. Their decision to reclaim their innocence in the face of certain death provided a moment of moral clarity that transcended the political machinations surrounding their persecution. The image of the last Grand Master dying in flames while proclaiming his order's innocence created a powerful martyrdom narrative that would inspire legends and conspiracy theories for centuries to come. Jacques de Molay's alleged curse upon his persecutors, predicting that both Philip the Fair and Pope Clement V would join him in death within a year, gained credibility when both men did indeed die in 1314, adding supernatural elements to an already dramatic story. As you approach the threshold of sleep, let the final flames that consumed the last Grand Master remind you that even the end of great institutions can carry within it the seeds of eternal memory and eventual justice. The Templars' physical destruction could not erase the ideals they had represented or the contributions they had made to medieval civilization. The immediate aftermath of the Templar suppression created ripple effects throughout European society that extended far beyond the fate of individual members. The financial networks that the order had developed over 2 centuries did not simply disappear, but were absorbed into other institutions and gradually evolved into the banking systems that would finance the later medieval economy. Italian banking houses, in particular, benefited from the elimination of their Templar competitors while adopting many of their innovations in international finance. The architectural legacy of the Templars proved more durable than their institutional existence, as their castles, churches, and commanderies continued to serve various purposes long after their builders had vanished. Many of these structures were adapted for use by other religious orders or secular authorities, their solid construction and strategic locations making them valuable regardless of their original purpose. The round churches built in imitation of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre continue to inspire architectural innovation and religious devotion for generations. The military innovations developed by the Templars during their 2 centuries of warfare in the East influenced the evolution of medieval military practice long after their disappearance. Their emphasis on discipline, training, and coordination became standard elements of professional military development, while their castle building techniques contributed to the advancement of medieval fortification design. The concept of combining religious devotion with military service continued to inspire other orders and secular institutions. The legends and literature that grew up around the Templars in the centuries following their suppression often bore little resemblance to the historical reality of their existence, but they testified to the powerful impression that the order had made upon medieval imagination. Stories of hidden treasures, secret knowledge, and mystical practices reflected both the genuine mystery surrounding their internal ceremonies and the human tendency to romanticize vanished institutions. The question of Templar guilt or innocence, debated by historians for 7 centuries, ultimately matters less than the broader significance of their rise and fall, as an example of how medieval institutions adapted to changing circumstances. Their success in combining religious devotion with practical effectiveness made them one of the most influential organizations of their era, while their inability to adapt to fundamentally altered conditions contributed to their eventual destruction. The Templars' story illuminates the complex relationships between secular and ecclesiastical power that characterized medieval European politics. Their rise depended upon the support of both kings and popes, but their fall demonstrated how quickly such support could evaporate when political calculations changed. The tension between international loyalties and local allegiances that complicated their final years reflected broader changes in European political development. The economic impact of the Templars extended far beyond their immediate activities to influence the development of medieval commercial practices and financial institutions. Their innovations in banking, credit, and international finance helped create the economic infrastructure that would support Europe's later commercial expansion. The trust and reliability that they had established in their financial operations set standards that influenced banking development for centuries. The religious significance of the Templars transcended their specific institutional form to embody broader tensions within medieval Christianity between worldly engagement and spiritual devotion. Their attempt to serve God through warfare reflected the militant Christianity of their era, while their monastic vows demonstrated the continuing appeal of traditional religious values. The controversy surrounding their suppression highlighted ongoing debates about the proper relationship between religious institutions and secular power. As the night reaches its deepest hour and this long tale draws toward its close, consider how the Templars' legacy continued to evolve long after their physical extinction. Their memory, preserved in documents and legends, in architectural remains and institutional innovations, became part of the cultural foundation upon which later generations would build their own understanding of faith, duty, and service. The final saga of the Knights Templar thus extends far beyond the flames that consumed Jacques de Molay in 1314, encompassing all the ways in which their example continued to inspire and influence human endeavour. Their rise from humble beginnings to international prominence, their adaptation to countless challenges and opportunities, their tragic destruction through political conspiracy, and their ultimate transformation into legend represents one of history's most complete illustrations of how human institutions embody both the highest aspirations and the deepest flaws of the societies that create them. In the quiet darkness that now surrounds you, as this ancient story reaches its natural conclusion, let the memory of those 9 knights kneeling in prayer in a Jerusalem church 8 centuries ago remind you that every ending contains within it the possibility of new beginnings, and that the deepest truths about human courage and devotion transcend the particular circumstances of any single age or institution. Yet the tale of the Templars extends beyond even their dramatic end, flowing like a deep underground river through the centuries that followed, carrying their influence into ages they could never have imagined. The immediate years following the execution of Jacques de Molay witnessed a curious phenomenon that would have puzzled the order's persecutors had they lived to observe it. Rather than fading quietly into historical obscurity, the memory of the Templars began to take on new forms and meanings that proved far more enduring than their physical existence had been. The very completeness of their destruction, combined with the dramatic circumstances of their end, created a void in European consciousness that subsequent generations would fill with increasingly elaborate myths and legends. The first chronicles to emerge in the decades following 1314 already showed signs of the romanticization that would characterize later Templar literature. Writers who had access to surviving documents and perhaps even to former members of the order began crafting narratives that emphasized their heroism, their devotion, and their unjust persecution, while downplaying or ignoring any evidence that might have supported their accusers. This selective memory, while perhaps historically incomplete, reflected a genuine recognition of the Order's positive contributions to medieval civilization. As you allow this extended epilogue to carry you deeper toward peaceful rest, imagine the scribes working by candlelight in monastery cells and royal chancelleries, their pens moving steadily across parchment as they preserved and transformed the Templar legacy for future generations. Their careful letters, formed with the same devotion that had once characterized Templar prayers, ensured that the Order's memory would survive long after their accusers had been forgotten. The redistribution of Templar properties throughout Europe created complex legal and political situations that would influence regional development for centuries. In France, much of their wealth eventually found its way into royal coffers, contributing to the financial strength that that would enable the French monarchy to pursue its ambitious territorial and political goals throughout the later medieval period. The irony that Templar resources helped finance the very type of centralized royal power that had destroyed them would not have been lost on observers who understood the deeper currents of political change. England's handling of former Templar properties demonstrated a different approach that reflected both the kingdom's distinct political traditions and its more cautious relationship with papal authority. Many English Templar estates were granted to the Hospitallers, maintaining at least the fiction of continued religious purpose, while others were absorbed into royal domain or granted to secular nobles who had supported the crown during difficult periods. The Temple Church in London, that magnificent round structure that had symbolized Templar presence in England, passed to legal societies that would eventually become the Inns of Court, creating an unexpected connection between the warrior monks and the development of English common law. The survival of modified Templar institutions in Iberia provided perhaps the most direct continuation of their original mission and ideals. The Order of Christ in Portugal, successor to the Portuguese Templars, would play a crucial role in that kingdom's age of exploration, their cross appearing on the sails of ships that carried Portuguese explorers to Africa, Asia, and the Americas. Prince Henry the Navigator himself served as Grand Master of the Order of Christ, linking Templar traditions directly to the expansion of European influence that would reshape the global balance of power. This Portuguese connection illustrates one of the most fascinating aspects of Templar legacy, how their organizational methods and spiritual ideals influenced developments that their founders could never have anticipated. The systematic approach to administration and finance that had characterized Templar operations proved remarkably adaptable to new circumstances and challenges. Portuguese exploration and colonization efforts benefited enormously from institutional knowledge and practices that trace their origins directly back to the commanderies of medieval France and the castle workshops of Outremer. In the German lands, where political fragmentation had prevented systematic suppression, many former Templars found refuge with the Teutonic Knights, carrying their traditions and expertise into the Baltic Crusades that would continue for another century. The Teutonic Order's subsequent development showed clear influences from Templar organizational methods, particularly in their approach to territorial administration and economic development. The great castle of Marienburg, seat of the Teutonic Grand Masters, incorporated architectural and defensive features that reflected lessons learned from Templar castle building in the East. The intellectual legacy of the Templars proved as durable as their organizational innovations, though it flowed through channels that were often hidden or disguised due to the dangerous associations that open acknowledgement might have created. Many of the scholarly works produced in Templar scriptoriums found their way into monastic and university libraries throughout Europe, where they influenced the development of medieval learning in ways that are only now being fully appreciated by modern historians. The Templars' extensive contacts with Eastern Christians, Muslims, and other non-Latin religious traditions had exposed them to philosophical and theological ideas that were often more advanced than contemporary European scholarship. Their libraries contained works on mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and natural philosophy that had been translated from Arabic and Greek sources, representing a treasure trove of knowledge that would prove invaluable to the intellectual renaissance of the later medieval period. As the 14th century progressed and gave way to the 15th, the memory of the Templars became increasingly detached from historical reality and more closely associated with various forms of esoteric knowledge and hidden wisdom. This transformation reflected broader changes in European religious and intellectual life, as traditional certainties gave way to new forms of questioning and exploration. The Renaissance fascination with ancient wisdom and secret traditions found in the Templars a perfect symbol of knowledge that had been preserved despite persecution and suppression. The development of printing in the 15th century allowed Templar legends to spread far beyond the scholarly circles that had previously controlled access to written knowledge. Popular pamphlets and books appeared throughout Europe, each adding new elements to the growing mythology, while often ignoring or contradicting established historical facts. This democratization of Templar memory, while historically problematic, demonstrated the continuing appeal of their example to ordinary people seeking inspiration and meaning in increasingly complex times. The Protestant Reformation of the 16th century created new contexts for interpreting Templar history. As reformers sought historical precedents for resistance to papal authority and Catholic institutional power, the Templars' persecution by a corrupt pope and an avaricious king provided Protestant polemicists with a powerful example of ecclesiastical tyranny and the need for religious reform. This appropriation of Templar memory for sectarian purposes further distorted historical understanding, while ensuring that their story remained relevant to contemporary religious and political debates. Meanwhile, the Catholic Counter-Reformation prompted its own re-examination of Templar history, as church authorities sought to defend papal actions while acknowledging the order's legitimate contributions to Christian civilization. This delicate balancing act produced scholarly works that attempted to separate the order's genuine achievements from the accusations that had led to their suppression, creating more nuanced historical interpretations that began to approach modern standards of evidence and analysis. The 17th and 18th centuries witnessed the emergence of Freemasonry and other secret societies that claimed direct descent from the medieval Templars, creating elaborate mythologies that bore little resemblance to historical reality, but spoke to deep human needs for brotherhood, purpose, and connection to noble traditions. These Masonic Templar legends, while historically unfounded, demonstrated the continuing power of the Order's example to inspire new forms of organization and commitment. As you drift deeper into the peaceful embrace of sleep, let the image of these secret meetings in London coffeehouses and Parisian salons remind you of how ideals can transcend the institutions that first embodied them. The Templar commitment to brotherhood, service, and spiritual development found new expression in very different circumstances, adapted to serve the needs of merchants and intellectuals rather than warrior monks. The French Revolution and its aftermath created yet another context for Templar memory, as revolutionaries seeking to understand and justify their actions against the monarchy and church found in the Order's destruction a precedent for their own struggles against institutional oppression. The revolutionary fascination with ancient secrets and hidden knowledge made the Templars natural symbols of resistance to tyranny, while their persecution provided historical validation for attacks on traditional authority. Napoleon's expedition to Egypt in 1798 sparked renewed interest in Eastern mysticism and ancient wisdom, creating fertile ground for new elaborations of Templar mythology. The discovery of Egyptian monuments and artifacts, combined with increasing knowledge of Eastern religious traditions, provided raw material for theories that connected the Templars to much older streams of esoteric knowledge. These connections, while historically baseless, reflected genuine human curiosity about the relationship between different wisdom traditions and the possibility of universal spiritual truths. The Romantic movement of the 19th century found in the Templars perfect subjects for literary and artistic treatment, combining, as they did, elements of chivalry, mystery, religious devotion, and tragic fate. Writers like Sir Walter Scott created fictional Templars who embodied the romantic ideals of honor, passion, and noble suffering, while artists depicted their ceremonies and battles with dramatic flair that emphasized emotional impact over historical accuracy. This romanticization, while further distorting historical understanding, ensured that Templar imagery would remain vivid and compelling for popular audiences. The development of historical scholarship during the 19th century began the long process of separating Templar fact from Templar fiction, as trained historians gained access to medieval documents and applied increasingly rigorous methods of analysis to the surviving evidence. This scholarly work revealed both the genuine achievements of the historical order and the extent to which later generations had transformed their memory to serve contemporary needs and fantasies. The archaeological rediscovery of Templar sites throughout the Middle East during the 19th and 20th centuries provided physical evidence that complemented and sometimes contradicted the documentary sources that had previously constituted the primary basis for historical understanding. The excavation of Templar castles, churches, and settlements revealed details about daily life, military organization, and economic activities that illuminated aspects of their existence that had been largely invisible in contemporary chronicles. The two world wars of the 20th century created new contexts for understanding the Templar legacy, as modern conflicts demonstrated both the potential nobility and the ultimate futility of military solutions to complex political and religious problems. The mechanized warfare and massive casualties of modern conflict made the medieval ideal of the warrior monk seem both quaint and profound, representing a time when individual courage and spiritual commitment could still make meaningful differences in historical outcomes. The establishment of Israel in 1948 and the subsequent conflicts in the Middle East gave the Templar story renewed relevance, as contemporary observers noted parallels between medieval crusading efforts and modern attempts to establish and maintain Western influence in the region. These comparisons, while often superficial, highlighted the continuing relevance of questions about religious conflict, cultural interaction, and the limits of military power that had characterized the Templar experience. The late 20th and early 21st centuries have witnessed an explosion of popular interest in Templar history, fueled by novels, films, and television programs that have introduced their story to global audiences, while often taking considerable liberties with historical facts. This popular revival has created both opportunities and challenges for serious historical scholarship, as increased public interest has supported academic research while simultaneously perpetuating myths and misconceptions that complicate public understanding. The digital revolution has transformed access to historical sources and scholarly research about the Templars, making medieval documents and modern analyses available to anyone with internet access. This democratization of historical knowledge has enabled more sophisticated popular understanding, while also facilitating the spread of alternative theories and conspiracy narratives that often ignore or reject scholarly consensus. Modern archaeological techniques, including satellite imagery, ground-penetrating radar, and advanced dating methods, continue to reveal new information about Templar sites and activities throughout Europe and the Middle East. These discoveries provide fresh perspectives on questions that have intrigued historians for centuries, while raising new puzzles about aspects of Templar life that remain poorly understood. The contemporary study of medieval economics and finance has revealed the true extent of Templar innovation in banking and commercial practices, demonstrating that their contributions to the development of European capitalism were far more significant than previously recognized. Modern financial instruments and international banking practices can trace their genealogy directly back to methods pioneered in Templar commanderies 7 centuries ago. Environmental archaeology and climate studies have provided new insights into the agricultural and economic challenges that the Templars faced in their various territories, revealing how they adapted their practices to local conditions and contributed to technological innovations that improved medieval agricultural productivity. Their systematic approach to land management and economic development established patterns that influenced regional development for centuries. The study of medieval military technology and tactics has illuminated the Templars' role in transmitting Eastern military innovations to Western Europe, demonstrating how their Eastern experience contributed to broader developments in medieval warfare. Their castle-building techniques, siege warfare methods, and cavalry tactics influenced military development throughout Europe and beyond. Modern understanding of medieval religious life has provided new appreciation for the Templars' spiritual innovations and their attempts to synthesize contemplative and active religious vocations. Their rule and their religious practices represented genuine attempts to address theological and practical challenges that continued to influence Christian spirituality long after their suppression. The contemporary study of cross-cultural contact and religious interaction has revealed the complexity and sophistication of Templar relationships with Eastern Christian, Muslim, and other non-Latin religious communities. These relationships, while often complicated by military conflict, involved levels of cultural exchange and mutual influence that challenge simple narratives about medieval religious antagonism. As you approach the deepest levels of peaceful sleep, let the recognition of this continuing scholarly discovery remind you that even the most thoroughly studied historical subjects continue to yield new insights and revelations. The Templars' story remains alive and evolving as each generation brings new questions and new methods to bear on the evidence they left behind. The legacy of the Knights Templar in the 21st century encompasses not only their historical achievements and failures, but also their symbolic power as representatives of ideals that transcend any particular time or place. Their commitment to service, their willingness to sacrifice for causes greater than themselves, their attempts to bridge different worlds and traditions, and their ultimate fate as victims of political conspiracy and institutional jealousy speak to universal human experiences that remain relevant in contemporary contexts. The questions that the Templars' story raises about the relationship between religious faith and political power, between international idealism and local loyalties, between individual virtue and institutional corruption, continue to challenge modern societies struggling with similar tensions. Their example provides both inspiration and warning about the possibilities and limitations of human institutions in pursuing noble goals. Their financial innovations remind modern observers that economic systems and practices emerge from specific historical circumstances, while often producing consequences that extend far beyond their original contexts. The international banking networks that characterize contemporary global economics can trace their ancestry directly to medieval Templars carrying letters of credit between their scattered commanderies. Their military heritage speaks to continuing questions about the role of force in protecting humanitarian values and the challenges of maintaining ethical standards in violent conflicts. Modern peacekeeping forces, international interventions, and military humanitarian missions face many of the same moral and practical dilemmas that confronted Templar knights in the medieval East. Their architectural legacy continues to inspire contemporary builders and designers who recognize in Templar castles and churches examples of functional beauty and purposeful design that remain relevant to modern needs. The integration of defensive necessity with spiritual aspiration that characterize their major construction projects provides models for contemporary architects seeking to create structures that serve both practical and symbolic functions. Their organizational innovations offer lessons for modern institutions attempting to coordinate complex activities across cultural and geographical boundaries. The Templars' success in maintaining unity and effectiveness across their vast international network provides insights into the challenges and opportunities of global organization that remain relevant for contemporary multinational enterprises and international organizations. Most fundamentally, the Templars' story demonstrates the power of shared ideals and common purpose to motivate extraordinary individual and collective achievements. Their transformation from 9 impoverished knights into one of medieval Europe's most powerful institutions illustrates the potential for small groups of dedicated individuals to create lasting change when they combine practical skill with spiritual commitment. Their ultimate destruction reveals the vulnerability of even the most successful institutions to changing circumstances and hostile environments. The lessons of their fall remain relevant for contemporary organizations and movements that must navigate complex political environments while maintaining their essential character and mission. The continuing fascination with Templar history reflects deep human needs for meaning, purpose, and connection to traditions that transcend immediate circumstances. In an age of rapid change and uncertain futures, the Templars provide a symbolic anchor to concepts of honor, duty, service, and sacrifice that speak to enduring human values. Their memory serves as a bridge between medieval and modern worlds, demonstrating both the continuities and the changes that characterize human civilization across the centuries. Through their story, contemporary audiences can explore fundamental questions about faith, power, justice, and meaning that remain as relevant today as they were 8 centuries ago. As this extended tale finally draws to its close in the deep silence of the night, let the last echoes of Templar memory carry you gently into dreams where the distinction between past and present dissolves and all human aspirations find their ultimate fulfillment. The Knights Templar, in their rise and fall, in their achievements and failures, in their historical reality and legendary transformation, completed a journey that belongs not only to their specific time and place, but to the eternal human story of reaching toward ideals that forever exceed our grasp, yet forever inspire our efforts. In the final analysis, the true legacy of the Knights Templar lies not in any particular accomplishment or failure, but in their embodiment of the human capacity to dedicate individual lives to purposes greater than individual satisfaction. Their willingness to abandon personal comfort and security for service to God and neighbor, their commitment to protecting the vulnerable and defending the sacred, their acceptance of hardship and danger in pursuit of spiritual goals. These qualities transcend the medieval context in which they were expressed and speak to timeless human potentials that remain as relevant and necessary today as they were in the age of the Crusades. The white mantles have long since crumbled to dust. The red crosses faded beyond recognition. The castle walls fallen to siege engines of time and weather. Yet something essential in the Templar vision persists, woven into the fabric of human memory and aspiration, ready to inspire new expressions of ancient ideals whenever circumstances call forth individuals willing to serve causes greater than themselves. In this persistence of inspiration across the centuries, the Knights Templar achieved a form of immortality that their medieval contemporaries, thinking only in terms of earthly power and heavenly reward, could never have imagined. As sleep finally claims you completely, carrying you beyond the reach of historical narrative into the realm of peaceful rest, Let the story of these remarkable men serve as a gentle reminder that human courage, properly directed and sustained by genuine devotion, can indeed move mountains and change the course of history, leaving echoes that resonate through the ages long after the voices that first spoke them have fallen silent. The Knights Templar sleep now in history's embrace. Their long vigil ended, their sacred trust passed on to future generations who must find their own ways to serve the eternal causes that called forth their predecessors' sacrifice and devotion.